Welcome back to Eric's Hobby Workshop. In this episode, we're going to be crafting some Imperial Deathworld jungles, home to some of the most deadly flora and fauna known to man. Welcome back to Eric's Hobby Workshop. In this video, I'm going to show you a few ways to scratch build some jungle terrain. Now, I've seen a lot of jungle terrain built before, from tutorials in White Dwarf to other YouTubers doing jungle terrain, and some of the common methods are to use store-bought plants from a railroad store or something like that, and to use aquarium plants, and you get great results using these methods. But what you don't get is that archetypal sort of classic jungle feel of the vines hanging down and the silhouettes of creepers and trees. And so I'm going to try to capture something like that today in this build. And I think it turned out really nicely. So let's get to it. The idea behind making a centerpiece is to create something interesting that models will look great posing in front of. At this stage, I looked to some of the iconic jungles and forests that I remember from movies. The Lion King, Jurassic Park, and Star Wars. I noticed they all use overgrown fallen logs to add some middle ground interest when framing their shots, so that's what I'm going to build. So as you can see, I started with a chipboard base, made a wire armature, and then added some tinfoil to add some quick texture and bulk to the shape. I then used some black foam board and a piece of bark to add some relief to the base. I use a very sharp craft knife and cut on an angle and apply these pieces with hot glue. The bark also gets some hot glue and is put in place. I then use hot glue to attach the tree frame, making sure to stick as many of the armatures in place as I can without losing the overall look. That way it keeps it nice and stable. Double check with the Catachan model. Yeah, looking good. Next, I tear up some shreds of toilet paper to make a homemade filler. I add a bit of spackle into some water. 2 scoops should do it. Then I add white glue, mushing this around with my hands to get it all soupy. I've been in quarantine too long. I'm getting real messy here. I then mix this all together into a wet tuna salad-like consistency and apply it generously to the top of the log and the parts around it. The stuff didn't end up as sticky as I'd hoped, which is why it ends up only on the top of the log, but it ended up working out because it looks like moss and preserves the tinfoil texture on the bottom of the log. I also use it to fill the transitions a little bit between the bark and the chipboard ground, adding a more natural and gradual curve. When that's done, I add some more white glue just to seal it. If you've ever put mustard on a hot dog, you'll be able to do this stage. This is going to help seal and adhere to the previous step. For an extra little step for some quick filling, I add some super glue and sprinkle on some baking soda. The baking soda does something to the super glue that makes it crust into a hard shape, so it's great for filling tiny little gaps. I then paint on some black paint and Mod Podge mix to further seal the piece and get it ready for painting. I prime it black and then give it a coat of burnt umber odorless paint. Next, I come in with a dry brush. I dry brush a little bit of gray-green brown mixture onto the areas I want to paint. I paint green on the top of the log and come in stippling with successively lighter shades of green to get a nice highlighted mossy look. Cool, already looking good. To get a tree with an interesting silhouette, I again use a wire armature
this time making many branches coming out at a low angle. I use hot glue to cover the arms of the tree, giving it bulk and substance, and also an interesting mottled texture in some places. Next, I use packing peanuts from a box of vitamins that my wife ordered. And using the glue gun, I attach these on. They have a nice irregular shape that'll really give me some varied foliage when this is done. I make sure to glue as many of them to each other as possible, because this adds to the stability of the whole look. Once this is done, I take some more packing peanuts and I rip them to shreds between my thumb and forefinger. Once I have a big pile of those, I apply some glue to the top and just dip it into the shreds. It makes a quick and easy foliage texture. I actually switched to hot glue later on in the project, but any kind of glue works fine. We're going to seal it in really well later. Making sure to cover all the gaps. I don't want to see any of those round packing peanut shapes through the foliage. Next, I cut a base from some chipboard, and I decided I wanted to hide the bottom of this tree to make it look like it actually splits out into different branches even lower than the one that I originally made. This will also add some stability, so I used some scraps of chipboard and some scraps of foam and make that happen. Next, I smear some spackle on with my bare hands. Again, getting in there, why not? If you're not dirty, you're not crafting, that's what I always say. I come in with a brush to smooth some of the edges, push that spackle into the cracks, and make the transitions nice and smooth. I then wet my finger a little bit and smooth just the edges so there's a nice smooth seal around the base. Next, I started trying to paint it with a paintbrush with some really watered down glue. It didn't work very well. So I came in with some spray paint, starting with a really light color, and then adding some hunter's green, which is a darker green as you can see. I paint the base with a little bit of brown. And then I come back in with some light spritzes of the light green. This is trying to mimic the varied effect that foliage has in the jungle, where some parts of it are dark and shadowed and some pieces are caught in the bright sunlight and appear almost yellow. Next, I make a texture paint of some baking soda and brown paint, and I smear that onto the branches. This covers up the smooth hot glue texture and adds a nice roughness and a little bit more detail. I then dry brush the rock face just quickly with a little bit of gray-green paint. Let's make another kind of tropical plant. I start with a styrofoam plate and draw a leaf shape, or mini leaf shapes. From there, I draw a center line on each leaf, and lines coming out from that center line to give the leaf a little bit more texture. If you press your pen into the styrofoam, it leaves a nice permanent dent that'll be visible even after it's painted. You don't have to worry about staying in the lines of the leaves, because these are going to be cut out in a moment. Once I've got enough leaves, I start cutting them out. Once each leaf is cut out, I use a length of wire for each leaf. First, I fold the leaf down the middle to simulate the way a real leaf looks, and then I bend them backwards to give them a sort of scoop shape. With that done, I glue a little piece of wire on with hot glue. This will add some stiffness, keep that curve I just made, and also make them more articulable. If you want to bend them more or less, you can do that once it's happened. I then stick all the leaves into a piece of foam and hit them with a coat of Hunter's Green. By using a thin paint, a little bit of the translucence is preserved. I bunch them all together like a bouquet and twist their bottom wires together with 2 pairs of pliers. This leaves me a really interesting tropical looking plant. Pretty happy with that. Hardly took any time at all, and it's quite articulable. I paint on some Mod Podge onto the leaves to seal them and add a tiny bit of shine, but not too much. Next I'm going to make some forest litter ground cover. I use a couple bags of tea and some freeze-dried mint that I had lying around the house. I then add a dollop or 2 of brown paint and some Mod Podge, and I mix it into a paste that I then apply with my craft knife, sort of like putting peanut butter on a slice of toast. This is going to go a long way to giving that jungle effect. This stuff has a lot of detail, and it's leaf detail when you look at it. And it also fills gaps, smooths transitions, and just makes things look really natural. I apply it to my centerpiece as well. Making sure to get it on all the edges and all the transitions especially. Cool. Next, I use a piece of paper that I spray painted green. I could have just used green paper, but I didn't have any on hand at the moment, and I was just kind of in the mood to craft. Can't go to the store these days, you have to get everything by delivery, so you have to wait a couple days, which is not really how I do things. So I fold the paper in half and cut a small crescent shape. Once I have that crescent shape, I cut a bunch of lines into the paper, cutting through both sides at once, sort of like when you made a snowflake when you're a kid. And when you open it, you get a nice little fern or leaf texture. I put down a bead of hot glue, and I use that to stand up several of these leaves into a little plant. The fold in the leaf actually gives the leaves a little bit of rigidity, which makes them more durable than you'd expect. To pick up that little plant, first I spray on some green with a toothbrush, some lighter green to add some speckles. I actually kind of overdid it, but it's fine. And then using my craft knife, I scrape up the hot glue, and I have a nice little plant. Dot that on with some glue, and it adds a lot of detail to my project. Let's put another one in for good measure. Alright. Next I glue that armature to a root structure that I also made out of wire for the other plant. Smear on some more of that textured paint. And let's add this as well. Nice little space in here. Cool. I like especially how the roots are tangling in with each other a little bit. This plant I used using similar methods, this time a wire armature and paper leaves. Very simple. There's a million different kinds of plants you can make this way, so it's fun to experiment. Next I take a length of green twine and separate it into its minor strands. And with those strands I'm going to make some vines for my trees. I use a muddy green wash that I had lying around. It's a bit of brown, a bit of green. And as you can see, I'm using the dirty bowl from the other stuff I was doing, because there are no rules when you're crafting. wrap these vines around the trees and leave some hanging lengths. If they don't want to hang straight, I add some more solution to them and weigh them down with a clip of some kind so they dry straight up and down. This gives the tree a much more interesting silhouette. Let's add a plant to that one as well. Next I mix up some brown, off-white, and black to make a nice gray that I can come in and dry brush for a little bit more detail. Using a toothbrush and some off-white paint, I spray on a few dots of fungus or lichen or something just to add a little bit more detail here and there in the project. I do the same to the barks on the trees. Next I hit some of the raised areas with green. This sort of simulates small growth right at the ground level. Little shoots coming up and things like that. Really starts to sell that forest feel. I then come in with a dark wash, sort of a dark brown color. What this is going to do is help shade the recesses and make it look more appropriate at scale. I stipple that in some places just for a little bit of variation of ground color as well. And we are done. I'm really pleased with how this came out. I want to take a moment to give a special shout out to all my new patrons. Jim P, Lyander, X Labs, Robison Wells, Ken San, Jed, Siberius, Paypig69, Chris. Thank you guys all for your support. It really means a lot to me and really helps me keep this channel going. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a comment down below. I'll leave links to some of the materials I used in the description, and those will be Amazon affiliate links that help support the channel as well, if you feel like picking up any of the materials you saw me use. If you'd like to support the channel and maybe see your name in a future video, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on Eric's Hobby Workshop.